The cold metal walls of mining asteroid P447 echoed with the constant sound of pickaxes hitting rock. Deep underground, hundreds of humans worked in the dim light, their bodies covered in dust and sweat. The air was so thin that every breath had to come through special masks that barely worked. Kim Dae stopped for a moment and wiped his face with the back of his hand. His breath turned into tiny ice crystals inside his helmet. Around him, other humans continued their endless work, breaking apart rocks to find the precious metals that their alien masters wanted so badly. High above in the control room, Commander Vextal watched everything through thick glass windows. He was tall and thin, with grey skin that looked like old leather. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the workers below, counting them like cattle. "Look at them," Vextal said to his assistant, a smaller alien with 4 arms. 300 years ago, we destroyed their planet Earth completely, turned it into glass and dust, yet these humans still think they can fight us in their small, stupid ways." The assistant nodded and made notes on his electronic pad. "Should we punish them again, Commander?" "Not yet," Vextal replied. "Let them have their tiny rebellions. It makes them feel better, and happy slaves work harder." Down in the mines, Park Hana walked carefully between the rocks, carrying a bucket of metal pieces. She was smaller than most of the other workers, but her eyes were sharp and alert. As she passed Kim Dae, she handed him a chunk of silver metal. Their fingers touched for just a second. To anyone watching from above, it looked like normal work. 2 slaves passing, materials between each other. But in that quick touch, something else happened. Hana pressed her finger against Dae's palm in a special pattern. 3 short taps, 2 long ones, then 3 short again. It was a code that had been passed down secretly from parent to child for many generations. Dae felt the pattern and understood. He looked into Hana's eyes and gave a tiny nod. The message was received. Later that day, as the workers moved heavy equipment, they began to sing. It started with just one voice, then another joined in. Soon, dozens of humans were singing together. As they worked, the song was old, something their grandparents had taught them. The alien guards heard it but didn't worry. Humans always sang when they worked. It was just noise to keep their spirits up, but the guards didn't understand Korean. They didn't know that hidden inside the simple words about missing home and hoping for better days were numbers, mathematical sequences that described the positions of stars, coordinates for planets that the aliens had never discovered. And most importantly, a countdown that was getting closer to 0 every single day. The song told a story that no alien could understand. It spoke of a world that wasn't really dead, a planet that had been hiding in the darkness of space, growing, stronger and smarter, while everyone thought it was gone forever. As the work shift ended, loud sirens filled the air. The humans stopped their tools and formed lines. Armed guards with electric weapons herded them toward the living areas like sheep. The quarters were small metal boxes, barely big enough for one person to lie down. Each human got a bowl of grey, soup and a piece of stale bread. Kim Dae found himself in line next to Park Hana. As they walked, she hummed the song quietly. He joined in, and soon others around them were humming too. The guards thought it was just tired workers trying to comfort themselves, but the humming carried the same hidden message as the singing. Numbers and coordinates passed from person to person. Information that was being collected and stored in hundreds of human minds across the asteroid. Each person knew only a small piece of the bigger picture, but together they held secrets that could change everything. In his small cell, that night, Dae looked up at the tiny window that showed the stars outside. Somewhere out there, beyond the darkness, something was waiting. Something that remembered every human who had been taken, every family that had been broken apart, every child who had grown up as a slave. Park Hana, in her cell nearby, traced patterns on the wall with her finger. The same patterns her grandmother had taught her when she was little. Patterns that meant hope, patterns that meant home, patterns that meant the long wait was almost over. The aliens thought they had won completely. They believed that destroying Earth had ended humanity's story forever. But they had made one terrible mistake. They had forgotten that humans never forget where they come from, and somewhere in the deep cold of space, Earth was very much alive and getting ready to remind the galaxy exactly what happened to those who hurt her children. The countdown continued, hidden in work songs and whispered prayers, getting closer, to zero with each passing day. The massive space station hung in orbit around Tertius, a giant gas planet with swirling red and orange clouds. Inside the station's control room, dozens of screens showed data from sensors scattered across the star system. Most of the operators were aliens with multiple eyes and tentacle-like fingers, but in one corner sat a human. Li Jun squinted at his monitor, rubbing his tired eyes. He had been working for 16 hours straight, monitoring the deep space sensors that watched for enemy ships or dangerous asteroids. As one of only 3 humans allowed to operate advanced equipment on the station, he was always under suspicion. The aliens watched his every move, waiting for him to make a mistake they could punish him for. But today something strange appeared on his screen. The gravitational sensors were picking up readings from the edge of the solar system that didn't make sense. Space itself seemed to be bending and twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. The numbers kept changing in patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. Jun leaned forward and adjusted the sensors, thinking maybe there was a malfunction. But the readings stayed the same. Something huge was out there, something so massive that it was warping space around itself just by existing. "Overlord Crixhun," Jun called out carefully. He had learned to speak respectfully to avoid beatings. "I'm seeing some unusual readings on the long-range sensors." Crixhun was a tall alien with purple skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. He walked over to Jun's station with heavy steps, his metal boots clanking on the floor. His middle eye focused on the screen, while the other 2 eyes watched Jun suspiciously. "What is this garbage?" Crixhun growled, his voice sounding like gravel in a metal can. "These numbers are impossible." "The gravitational sensors are showing massive distortions at the system's edge," Jun explained, pointing at the screen. "Something very large is moving through space out there." Crixhun laughed, a harsh sound that made other workers look up nervously. "Probably just space junk or a broken asteroid. Your inferior human brain is seeing patterns where none exist. Your senses are weak compared to ours." "But, sir, the patterns are too regular to be random debris," Jun said quietly. "Look at the timing intervals. They repeat every 47 minutes exactly." "Are you questioning my judgment, slave?" Crixhun's voice turned dangerous. His hand moved toward the shock rod on his belt. Jun quickly lowered his eyes. "No, Overlord, I apologize. I'll mark it as cosmic debris in my report." Crixhun stared at him for a long moment, then walked away. But Jun continued watching the readings when no one was looking. The patterns were definitely not random. Something intelligent was moving out there, something that could bend space itself. He carefully saved the data to his personal files, encoding it using a special number system his sister had taught him when they were children. On the other side of the station, Choi Yu sat in front of a wall of communication equipment. Her job was to monitor all the radio signals coming into the system and sort them by importance. Most of the messages were boring reports from trading ships or military patrols. She had been doing this work for 5 years, and the endless stream of alien chatter had become background noise. But recently, she had started noticing something odd. Mixed in with all the normal communications were brief bursts of data that didn't match anything in the hegemony's databases. The signals were extremely short, lasting only a few seconds, but they used mathematical patterns that seemed familiar somehow. Yu had studied old Earth engineering before she was captured as a child. Her parents had been scientists, and they had taught her about the elegant mathematical principles that humans used to build their technology. These mysterious signals reminded her of those old lessons, but they were far more advanced than anything in the historical records. The signals appeared randomly, sometimes once a day, sometimes not for a week. But each time she caught one, Yu carefully recorded it in her personal notes. She used the same code system she had shared with her brother Jun years ago, before they were separated and assigned to different workstations. During their rest period, the siblings met in the station's small cafeteria. They sat at a table in the corner, eating thin soup and stale bread while pretending to have a normal conversation. But their hands moved in subtle gestures under the table, a sign language they had invented as children to talk without their parents hearing. Jun's fingers spelled out the gravitational readings he had detected. Yu responded with information about the strange signals. As they shared their data, both siblings began to understand what they were seeing. The timing matched perfectly. Every time Jun detected gravitational distortions, Yu picked up one of the mysterious transmissions. "Something big is coming," Jun signed with his hands, being careful not to let anyone see. "The gravity readings show objects larger than anything in our databases." "The signals are using advanced human mathematical principles," Yu replied silently, "but evolved far beyond what should be possible." They looked at each other across the table, both thinking the same frightening thought. For 300 years, everyone had believed that Earth was completely destroyed. The aliens had told stories about how they had turned humanity's home planet into melted glass and ash. But what if those stories were wrong? What if Earth had survived somehow? What if humanity had spent 3 centuries hiding in the darkness of space, growing stronger and smarter, while everyone thought they were extinct? The evidence was building every day. The gravitational distortions were getting stronger and more frequent. The mysterious signals were becoming more complex. And in slave camps across the galaxy, humans had started singing old songs with hidden meanings. Yu reached across the table and touched her brother's hand briefly. In that touch, she traced a simple pattern. 3 short taps, 2 long ones, 3 short again. The same pattern that was spreading through work songs and whispered conversations in human settlements. Throughout hegemony space, Jun understood immediately. It was a countdown, and that countdown was getting very close to 0. As they finished their meal and prepared to return to work, both siblings felt something they hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Somewhere out there in the cold darkness between the stars, something was coming. Something that remembered every human who had been enslaved, every family that had been torn apart, every child who had grown up in chains. The aliens thought they had won completely. They believed their victory was permanent, but they were about to learn that humans never forget, and Earth never abandons her children. The countdown continued, hidden in sensor readings and secret signals, getting closer to the moment when everything would change. The alarm sirens on Admiral Zorthak's flagship screamed so loudly that the metal walls seemed to shake. Red warning lights flashed in every corridor as crew members ran to their battle stations. In the command center, dozens of alien officers stared at their screens in confusion. "What is that thing?" shouted the navigation officer, his 4 eyes wide with fear. On the main display, something impossible had appeared at the edge of their solar system. It looked like a ship, but it was bigger than anything anyone had ever seen. The sensors couldn't get accurate readings because space itself seemed to bend around the massive object. Admiral Zorthak stood in the center of the command room, his tall frame covered in military medals and scars from 100 battles. He had conquered 12 different species and destroyed countless enemy fleets. His red skin had turned even darker with anger as he stared at the intruder. "Just one ship," he growled, his voice like grinding metal. "Some fool thinks they can challenge the entire hegemony fleet with a single vessel. Ready all weapons. Charge the main cannons. We'll turn this thing into space dust." Around him, his crew worked frantically at their controls. The flagship's massive guns began to hum with power. Across the system, 47 other hegemony warships received the attack order and started moving toward the mysterious object. But as they got closer, the true size of the thing became clear. It wasn't just big, it was enormous beyond imagination. The ship stretched across 15 kilometers of space, longer than most space stations. Its hull was covered in strange patterns that seemed to shift and move when you looked directly at them. "By the void," whispered the tactical officer. "The sensors are saying it's solid, but the gravitational readings show it existing in multiple dimensions at once." In the engineering section of Zorthak's flagship, Song Min was trying to keep the weapon systems running at full power. As one of the few humans allowed to work on advanced technology, he was always watched carefully by armed guards. But right now, everyone was too busy staring at the screens to pay attention to him. Min had been born on a human colony world before it was conquered. He still remembered his mother teaching him about the old Earth ships, the great vessels that had carried humans to the stars before the hegemony destroyed everything. But those ships had been small compared to this monster hanging in space. As he watched, something began to happen on the surface of the giant ship. Sections of its hull started to glow with a light that didn't look like anything in the visible spectrum. The patterns on its surface began moving faster, creating designs that hurt to look at directly. "Fire all weapons," Zorthak commanded. Every gun on every hegemony ship opened fire at once. Streams of plasma, particle beams, and fusion torpedoes raced through space toward the Dreadnought. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon, but the weapons never reached their target. As they got close to the giant ship, the energy beams and missiles simply stopped existing. They didn't explode or bounce off shields, they just disappeared as if they had never been fired at all. Then the Dreadnought began to respond. Sections of its hull opened like flower petals, revealing weapon systems that defied everything the hegemony knew about physics. Beams of energy that existed beyond normal light reached out and touched the first enemy ship. Song Min watched in amazement as the hegemony cruiser didn't explode or burn. Instead, it began to come apart at the most basic level. The metal hull separated into its component atoms. The crew inside had just enough time to scream before they too were broken down into their basic elements. Within seconds, the entire ship had become a cloud of scattered particles. "Impossible," Zorthak whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos in the command center. One by one, the weapons of the Dreadnought reached out and touched each hegemony vessel. 47 proud warships, each one capable of destroying cities, simply ceased to exist. They weren't defeated in battle. They were unmade at the molecular level by technology that was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Deep in the mining asteroid P447, Kim Day suddenly stopped working. He dropped his pickaxe and stood perfectly, still his eyes wide with wonder. Around him, other human workers were doing the same thing. Park Hana looked up from her bucket of ore, and her face showed the same expression of amazement. Something was happening inside their minds. For the first time in their lives, they could feel other humans across the galaxy. Not just the people working next to them, but thousands of humans on dozens of different worlds. It was like a network of consciousness had suddenly been activated, connecting every human in the galaxy. Day could suddenly see through the eyes of humans working in factories on distant planets. He knew exactly where every alien guard was standing, not just on his asteroid, but on space stations light years away. The knowledge flowed into his mind like water, clear and perfect. "The containment locks," Park Hana whispered. And somehow, she knew exactly which buttons to press to disable the force fields that kept them trapped. "I know how to turn off the security systems." All around them, other humans were discovering the same thing. 300 years of hidden knowledge, passed down through work songs and secret codes, was suddenly available to everyone at once. The rebellion that had been planned for generations could finally begin. Above them in space, the Dreadnought hung like a dark angel of vengeance. Its weapons had finished their work, and now it floated silently among the scattered atoms of the hegemony fleet. But it wasn't finished. From deep within its massive hull came a transmission that reached every human in the system. The voice spoke in perfect Korean, with no accent and no hesitation. It was warm and familiar, like a parent calling their children home after a very long day. "Children of Earth," the voice said, and every human who heard it felt tears running down their faces. "Your long night is ending. We have come to take you home." Song Min, standing in the ruins of the hegemony flagship's engine room, looked out through a porthole at the impossible ship that had appeared from nowhere. For the first time in 30 years, he smiled. Earth had not forgotten her children, and now finally it was time to go home. The darkness of space began to ripple and tear like fabric being pulled apart. One by one, massive shapes emerged from the void, each one appearing with a flash of light that could be seen from planets light years away. 17 more dreadnoughts materialized throughout hegemony space, each one larger and more terrifying than the last. The aliens who had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years watched their sensor screens in growing horror. These weren't just ships, they were floating cities of war, each one capable of destroying entire star systems. But what scared them most was the perfect coordination. All 18 dreadnoughts moved together, as if controlled by a single mind. In the hegemony's central command on their capital world, Supreme Commander Velkoth stood before a massive holographic display, showing the positions of all enemy vessels. His usually calm demeanor had cracked, revealing the fear underneath. "Mobilize everything," he commanded, his voice shaking slightly. "Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. Call back all our fleets from the outer territories. If we don't stop, this here and now our entire civilization will fall." The response was immediate and desperate. From across the galaxy, hegemony warships began jumping through space toward human-occupied systems. It was the largest military mobilization in their history, over 3,000 ships racing to defend their empire against 18 vessels that shouldn't even exist. But the humans weren't waiting for the battle to reach them. In monitoring stations, mining colonies, and slave camps throughout hegemony space, something extraordinary was happening. Li Jun sat at his control station, watching the chaos unfold on his screens. But now he wasn't alone in his mind. He could feel his sister Choi Yu across the facility, along with thousands of other humans he had never met. Their thoughts flowed together like streams joining a river, creating a network of consciousness that spanned the entire galaxy. "Now," whispered a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It might have been his sister's voice, or his own, or the voice of Earth herself. Jun's hands moved across his control panel with impossible precision. He had worked at this station for years, but he had never understood its full capabilities. Until this moment, the knowledge flowed into his mind from the collective consciousness of humanity, not just technical information, but the wisdom of engineers who had been planning this moment for 3 centuries. On the other side of the facility, Choi Yu was doing the same thing. Her fingers danced across the communication controls, sending shutdown commands to defense systems across dozens of worlds. She knew exactly which frequencies to use, which codes would disable the security networks, and which signals would free the electronic locks that kept humans trapped. All around them, their alien captors suddenly found their weapons wouldn't fire, their doors wouldn't lock, and their communication systems had gone completely silent. The humans they had treated as inferior slaves were systematically dismantling their technology from the inside. "What's happening?" screamed Overlord Crixhan, frantically pressing buttons on his control panel. None of them worked. "Why won't the systems respond?" Jun looked up at his former master, with eyes that no longer showed fear. "Because we built half of these systems," he said calmly. "You forced us to maintain your technology for 300 years. Did you really think we wouldn't learn how to turn it off?" The same scene was playing out across the galaxy. In factories and mines, on space stations and planetary bases, humans were rising up with perfect coordination. They moved like dancers, following the same music, each person knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. Park Hana stood in the center of mining asteroid P447, holding the control device that had kept hundreds of humans locked in their cells for years. With a simple gesture, she crushed it in her bare hands. The metal crumpled like paper, destroyed by strength she had never possessed before. "The children are free," she said, and her words were heard by Kim Day on the asteroid, and by humans, on distant worlds they had never seen. Meanwhile, the hegemony's military forces were discovering that their enemy was unlike anything they had ever faced. Admiral Zorthak, commanding the defense of the capital system, threw wave after wave of ships at the approaching Dreadnoughts. He had 300 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, crewed by the best soldiers in hegemony space. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. The Dreadnoughts didn't fight like normal ships. They moved through space like living things, their hulls shifting and changing as weapons emerged from impossible angles. When hegemony ships fired at them, the energy beams were absorbed or redirected, often striking other enemy vessels. But the most terrifying thing was what happened when the Dreadnoughts fought back. Their weapons didn't just destroy ships. They reached out and somehow convinced the enemy technology to stop working. Fusion reactors simply shut down. Weapon systems forgot how to fire. Life support systems decided they no longer wanted to support life. Zorthak watched from his command center as his proud fleet became nothing more than dead metal floating in space. His own flagship was still functional, but only because the Dreadnoughts seemed to want him alive. "This is impossible," he muttered, staring at the massive ships that hung in space around him like silent judges. "No technology can do what you're doing." Song Min stepped forward, no longer wearing the chains that had marked him as a slave. The human engineer looked older somehow, as if he had suddenly remembered knowledge that had been sleeping in his mind for years. "You're right," Min said quietly. "No technology that you understand can do this, but you never understood what Earth was becoming during those 3 centuries of hiding." "How?" Zorthak demanded, his voice breaking. "How did you survive? We turned your planet into glass. We saw it burn." Min smiled sadly. "You destroyed one world, but Earth was never just a planet. It was an idea. The idea that beings could choose cooperation over conquest, growth over domination. You thought you killed Earth, but you only made it grow stronger." Through the viewport, the Dreadnoughts began to move again. They weren't heading toward the hegemony capital to destroy it. Instead, they were spreading out across the system, taking positions around every slave camp, every prison, every place where humans had been held against their will. "You spent 300 years believing you had won," Min continued. "We spent 300 years becoming something you could never imagine, not just technologically, but spiritually. We learned to connect our minds, to share our knowledge, to move as one people across the entire galaxy." The lights in the command center began to dim as the ship's systems slowly shut down. But it wasn't an attack. It was more like the ship was going to sleep, its purpose fulfilled. "The age of oppression is over," Min said, and his words were heard by every human in the galaxy. "Earth has returned not as conquerors but as liberators. The long night is ending, and the dawn belongs to those who choose freedom over fear." Outside, the Dreadnoughts hung in space like dark angels, their work nearly done. The galaxy's greatest empire had fallen not to superior firepower, but to the simple truth that no force in the universe is stronger than a people united in their determination to be free. 7 days. That's all it took for the mighty hegemony to fall completely apart. An empire that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years simply collapsed like a house built from paper cards. The Dreadnoughts moved through space like gentle giants, carefully taking apart every prison, every slave camp, and every weapon designed to hurt innocent people. But they didn't destroy cities or kill civilians. Instead, they seemed to know exactly which buildings held slaves and which ones held families. Every weapon that could be used to oppress others simply stopped working, while hospitals and schools remained untouched. Kim Day walked slowly through gardens that had once belonged to a hegemony governor who lived in luxury while humans died in his mines. Now the beautiful palace had been turned into a shelter for refugees from dozens of different worlds. Former slaves from all across the galaxy were learning how to live as free people again. The gardens were filled with beings Day had never seen before. There were the Vorthak, tall blue creatures whose entire species had been enslaved for mining work. Next to them sat small, furry beings called the Mektar, who had been forced to build weapons for their captors. Children from a dozen different species played together on the grass, many of them laughing for the first time in their lives. "It's hard to believe it's real," said Park Hana, sitting down on a bench beside him. She was holding a small alien child who had been separated from her parents during the collapse. The little girl had stopped crying and was now playing with Hana's hair, fascinated by its different texture. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up back in the mines," Dai replied, watching as former hegemony soldiers helped distribute food to hungry refugees. These weren't the cruel guards who had beaten them for years. These were regular people who had been forced to serve in the military. When their officers had fled or surrendered, most of them had simply laid down their weapons and asked what they could do to help. In the distance, a massive shape moved slowly across the sky. One of the Dreadnoughts was passing overhead, but it no longer looked like a weapon of war. Its hull had changed, becoming more organic and beautiful. Gardens grew on its surface, and lights twinkled like stars along its sides. It looked more like a flying city than a warship. High above the planet, aboard Earth's first diplomatic vessel, Li Jun and Choi Yu worked side by side at a communications station that connected hundreds of worlds. Their job was to help rebuild the networks that the hegemony had used to control information, turning them into systems that would help different species talk to each other freely. "We're getting messages from the Kepler system," Yu said, adjusting her headset. "The mining colonies there are asking for help setting up their own government. They've never had to make decisions for themselves before." Jun nodded and began typing a response. "I'll connect them with the Council on New Geneva. They went through the same thing last month and can share what they learned." All around them, other humans worked at similar stations. Some were former slaves like themselves, while others were people who had been born free on hidden human colonies that had survived the hegemony's conquest. They worked together as if they had known each other all their lives, connected by the same network of consciousness that had made their victory possible. Song Min walked through the ship's corridors, carrying a translation device and a data pad filled with cultural information. Her job was one of the most important, helping different species understand that Earth's return didn't mean a new form of conquest. The hegemony ruled through fear, she explained to a group of alien diplomats who had come to negotiate treaties. They kept different species separated, so they couldn't work together. But Earth believes that cooperation makes everyone stronger. One of the diplomats, a tall creature with crystals growing from her skin, looked nervous. "But surely Earth wants something in return for freeing us, some form of tribute or service." Min smiled gently. "Earth wants what it has always wanted. For all conscious beings to be free to choose their own path. We're not here to rule you. We're here to make sure no one else can rule you either." It was a concept that many species found hard to understand. They had lived under oppression for so long that the idea of genuine freedom seemed impossible. But gradually, as weeks passed and no new demands came from Earth, they began to believe. The Dreadnoughts themselves were beginning to change. Every day they became less visible, fading into the darkness between stars like guardian spirits. They were still there. Anyone with the right senses could detect their presence, but they no longer dominated the sky with their massive size. Children on 100 worlds looked up at the stars before bedtime, and their parents told them stories about the great ships that had come from the darkness to set them free. The children would ask if the ships were still there, watching over them. "Yes," the parents would say, "they're always there. As long as there are people who need protection, Earth will be watching." On the former hegemony capital world, the last prison camps were being emptied. Beings who had been locked away for decades walked out into sunlight they thought they would never see again. Many of them were too weak to walk far, but human volunteers were there to help them take their first steps toward freedom. Park Hana found herself working with a group of elderly aliens who had forgotten what their home worlds even looked like. Some of them had been prisoners for so long that they were afraid to leave their cells. Freedom was more terrifying than captivity, because it meant making choices they hadn't been allowed to make for years. "Take your time," she told them gently. "There's no hurry. The ships will wait for you as long as you need." One old alien, whose species she didn't recognize, grabbed her hand with his three-fingered grip. "Will Earth truly take us home?" he asked, in a voice that shook with hope and fear. "Earth will take you wherever you want to go," Hana replied. "If you want to go home, we'll help you find it. If you want to stay here and build something new, we'll help with that too. The choice is yours." As night fell across the galaxy, a new kind of peace settled over countless worlds. It wasn't the harsh quiet of oppression, but the gentle calm that comes when people are finally safe to dream about tomorrow. In the depths of space, the Dreadnoughts continued their endless patrol. They had become more than ships. They were symbols of hope, reminders that somewhere in the darkness Earth was still watching over her children and all those who chose to stand with them. The galaxy's long nightmare was over. The age of tyranny had ended not with violence, but with the simple declaration that all conscious beings deserved to be free. And in the vast emptiness between the stars, humanity kept its eternal vigil, ready to answer the call whenever freedom needed defending. The new dawn had begun, and it would last as long as there were those who remembered that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.